So we have reached an interesting point in the mainstream discussion of UFOs, or what are more commonly referred to now as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. Over the past few years, we have seen a progression of interest take place on this issue, an interest that has been catalyzed by the sudden shift of position that's been performed by the United States government and its intelligence and defense apparatus on the topic of UFOs. From official statements and comments via the Department of Defense, Office for Naval Intelligence, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, former presidents, current congressional staffers, intelligence officials, trained military observers, and weapons specialists. The list goes on, all of which have validated the legitimacy of the UFO issue, highlighting that this is an active issue that is being witnessed by trained military personnel in real time. We've heard the testimonies of US Navy strike fighter pilots regarding their experiences with UFOs. We've seen officially released and acknowledged video captures of anomalous craft that defy our laws of physics. Released through the Pentagon, there has been the establishment of a task force within the Office of Naval Intelligence to investigate the phenomenon. We've had a preliminary assessment on UAPs released via the Office of the Director for National Intelligence, which, although bureaucratically crafted in how it was written, highlighted once again that the vast majority of cases reported and recorded by highly trained observers and specialists of unidentified flying objects performing in ways that outstrip all known human-based inventories are in fact true unknowns for which nobody is claiming responsibility. These craft are able to perform in ways that literally defy the current models we have for material engineering, propulsion physics, and aerodynamics. These beyond next generation vehicles, as they have been described by government insiders, can operate in the oceans, the atmosphere, and the vacuum of space without any disruption to their performance or change in their flight characteristics. These are not speculations, but are recognized and understood at the highest levels of government as the reality of the capabilities we are faced with by these currently unknown intelligences. Since this is a position that has now been expressed by high-ranking members of the US Senate and congressional bodies, a position that's been bolstered by the reliable testimony of highly trained observers in the US Navy with eyes-on experience with these exotic craft with incredible capabilities, people like Commander David Fravor, as well as individuals leading this charge for UFO transparency like Luis Elizondo, who directed one of the Pentagon's UFO programs known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, first reported on in 2017 by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal for the New York Times. And this was an article that really started this ball rolling properly in the first place, with the acknowledgements from individuals like Senator Harry Reid or the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon, who stated that whether UFOs are real or not is no longer the question. The question is, what are they? And where do they come from? So all of these individuals and all of the changes over the past few years in how the UFO issue is handled by the US government has now arrived at a point that many of us were concerned it may arrive to. And this is a point where some aspect within the military intelligence industrial complex is attempting to put the genie back in the bottle. Because what we're seeing now is an effort to cover up the UFO issue by the Department of Defense, whilst at the same time we have bipartisan support for an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, spearheaded by Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, proposing the establishment of a permanent office for the study of UFOs, an office that promotes transparency for not only Congress, but for the wider public and the scientific community. It is a proposal that offers us a chance to provide a clearer, recognizable framework upon which a meaningful effort to understand this phenomenon can be accelerated. This amendment would require an escalation of priority on this issue within the US defense and intelligence infrastructure, and for a higher level of resources to be delegated towards this effort. The Rubio-Gillibrand amendment aims to establish an office called the Anomaly Surveillance Tracking and Resolution Office, or ASTRO for short. And this seems to be a sincere and worthwhile attempt to gain a congressional foothold in the UAP conversation, permitting for a more streamlined and transparent approach to dealing with this issue. However, the Department of Defense has made an attempt to counter this initiative by establishing its own group, and this group's sole purpose is to obfuscate and eradicate interest in the UAP or UFO discussion. Firstly, they have done so with their choice of name. So unlike the Rubio-Gillibrand amendments proposal, which is for an office called ASTRO, which is easy to say and contextually relevant, the Department of Defense has opted for the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronisation Group, or for short, the AOIMSG. Yeah, that really rolls off the tongue and tantalizes interest, but that's exactly why they chose this name. They wanted to find the least interesting sounding and hardest to abbreviate group name they could find. But it's not just the name that's a problem, it's the intentions of the group or the lack thereof. And this is best explained by contrasting the goals of the Rubio-Gillibrand ASTRO group with the goals of the Department of Defense's AOIMSG group. So ASTRO intends to treat this subject with the correct terminology that applies to legitimate cases of UAP. One such term, as described by individuals such as Lou Elizondo, is transmedium. This is used to describe the advanced performance capabilities of legitimate UAPs, which, as I mentioned earlier, have the ability to perform in our oceans, our atmosphere, and the vacuum of space without any change in performance capabilities or flight characteristics. Senator Gillibrand's ASTRO proposal fully intends to use this terminology, but the AOIMSG, which I'm just going to call the DoD group for now to save time, has not made any reference to transmedium capabilities. ASTRO intends to develop and implement a plan for UAP data collection and analysis. The DoD group has no such requirement. ASTRO intends to provide unclassified briefings to congressional bodies and to also inform the public when it's legally applicable to do so regarding UAP data collection and assessment of the situation. The DoD group has stated no intention of providing unclassified briefings whatsoever to either Congress or the wider citizenship. ASTRO intends to study the physiological impact of UAP, which very well could be impacting trained military personnel who have had close proximity experiences with UAP. The DoD group has stated no intention of studying physiological effects of UAP on its military personnel. ASTRO hopes to build bridges with the scientific community, establish lines of communication and data sharing in order to further our scientific understanding of the phenomenon outside of the constraints of stovepiped, highly compartmentalized programs that don't allow the scientific method of collaboration to benefit the research. The DoD group, however, has made no reference to establishing relationships with the scientific community whatsoever. ASTRO intends to examine the science behind the energy and propulsion systems being utilized by UAP, whereas the DoD group has made no reference to the addressing of technical analysis and research on energy or propulsion systems that may be tied into UAP performance capabilities. ASTRO wants to build ties with foreign allies to bring other countries and governments together on trying to understand this issue. The The DoD group has made no reference to multinational collaboration and intelligence sharing on the UAP issue. ASTRO wants to address the potential national security threat posed by the routine penetration of military training ranges and secure facilities that are housing strategic nuclear assets by unknown vehicles with beyond next-generation capabilities that appear to be monitoring our warfighting infantry both at home and within active combat theatres, with a particular interest in our nuclear capabilities. The DoD has made no reference towards furthering our understanding of these behaviours by UAP. So as we can see, the differences between the ASTRO proposal and the DoD's AOIMSG are night and day. It is extremely clear that the DoD is attempting to shut down a conversation that has been gaining momentum since 2017 and has now reached a point where bipartisan decision-making on UAPs has unified Congress under the banner of a demand for further transparency from the various agencies and intelligence collecting groups that have actionable data on the UAP issue. I think it's far too late for the Department of Defense or any other forces within the Pentagon to shut down this conversation, and so this recent attempt to do so has only bolstered the energy of congressional staffers on both sides of the political aisle to demand clarity from their government on this issue. So right now there is this tug of war between the establishment of what honestly seems to be a legitimate office for investigating the phenomenon through the Rubio-Gillibrand amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act with the proposal of establishing ASTRO, and on the other side you have the Pentagon and the Department of Defense trying to stonewall this action by establishing a group that has only one intention: make UFOs less interesting by burying the subject in bureaucratic red tape, dull verbiage, and a severe lack of transparency and outreach. And so I suppose for those of you listening who are American citizens, this is an important time to write to your Congress and express your interest for the Rubio-Gillibrand amendment, because this DoD group has every intention of covering up this discussion. As Representative Tim Burchett recently stated at the United States House of Representatives, when he said that he does not trust this new office from the Pentagon, stating that it stunk of a government cover-up, and that the American people have a right to know the truth. We do have a right to know the truth. All of us, globally, as human beings, we have a right to know. But I suppose the question is, do we really want to know? For some of us, the answer is simple. Yes, we want to know. But for others, we have to appreciate that this is a definitive moment in the human story. We're on the knife's edge of a fundamental paradigm shift in collective understanding of our place in the universe, and this is not going to be incorporated into everyone's psyche in a streamlined fashion. There will be resistance to the new reality. We're already experiencing that, and I imagine that this discussion will continue, but so long as the rollout of this issue is being handled primarily by the government, we need to be prepared to accept that it's being handled extremely delicately. And I think what we're seeing is a very accurately planned out blueprint for addressing this highly disruptive issue. And we're going to be taking baby steps for quite some time, but we cannot allow this subject to fall back into the shadows. And there are forces at play that absolutely want to do that. The US government and its respective intelligence and defense infrastructure is not a cohesive body. It's an absolute maze of vertical pathways where interagency collaboration gets rarer as the secrecy gets higher. We're looking at a massive cluster of alliances, and not everyone is on the same page. Not every intelligence agency knows the same amount of information as any other. They keep secrets from each other, they keep programs and research from each other. Not everything goes up the appropriate chain of command, and then of course you have the potential for these rogue agencies or groups that may have broken away from the standardized practices altogether and are answerable to nobody. I would imagine these groups share relationships with aerospace and defense contractors off of the books. But the point is, the government is not a family under one house. It's a dysfunctional neighborhood where people keep secrets from each other. And so this brings up another pressing issue. Even if the Rubio-Gillibrand amendment is passed, the idea that these incredibly secretive groups that exist outside the perimeter fence of standard governmental practice, these groups that are holding the real secrets, the technologies, the biological materials, groups that may have black money funding from illegal trafficking channels, groups that for all intents and purposes do not officially exist. What could ever compel such groups to give up their treasure, to even acknowledge they exist? Well, one person for sure seems to know a thing or two about this. Lou Elizondo has made comments that suggest a knowledge of such groups that do exist, that are not officially recognized, although he does not go into much detail about who they might be. But setting aside the possibility of rogue agencies or programs that have made drastic leaps forward, technologically speaking, in extreme secrecy, if this amendment passes, then we will be taking another step forward towards opening this conversation up to a multifaceted discussion from government to the scientific community and the larger public. And so once again, I urge you to write to your local constituents, write to Congress, contact your representatives, and show your support for the Rubio-Gillibrand amendment.